Italijanskih pisaca naučne fantastike o kojima će govoriti Franćesko Verso, Flora, Staljano i Gino, Lukreci. This is promotion, Italian science fiction writers, Franćesko Verso, Flora, Staljano and Gino, Lukreci. Here you are.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you for being here. And we will take you on a journey to Italy. Across different centuries. We have divided this presentation in three parts. We will exchange the microphone and the parts about the history of Italian science fiction, and then we will have Gino talking about Italian fandom. Okay, so we can start from the very past.
Yes. In the past, Italy has played an important role in the development of both science, of both literature and science. I'm pretty sure many of you know La Divina Commedia by Dante Alighieri. Dante is probably the most famous writer we had. It's like the Italian Shakespeare, let's say. And he imagined this fantastic voyage in Inferno, Purgatorio and Paradiso, where using allegories and metaphors, he imagined fantastic creatures, divine forces, and seducing landscape. And his work has affected the imagination of future generation of everybody, we can say, in Italy at least. Then I'm pretty sure you all know Leonardo da Vinci, who is a famous painter, you know, La Gioconda in Paris, but Leonardo was an incredible inventor too. So he has set incredible milestones not only in art but in science too. Mostly in the area of engineering flying machines, because he created this project, he made this project about a flying machine, hydraulics and construction, and his works too have inspired, of course, millions of people in the future generations, not only in Italy but in the whole world, we can say. Moving on to the Renaissance era, the studies of Galileo Galilei, which had a huge fight and quarrel with the church because of its theories, and then together with Copernicus and Kepler initiated its scientific observation of space and contributed to the basis of modern physics and astronomy. While one of the first modern utopias was written in 1602 by Tommaso Campanella. The title of the book is The City of the Sun, and in this book, Tommaso Campanella, the author, depicted the Universal Republic under the rule of a high priest that was called the Sun, and depicting a sort of anti-literal communism of goods and property.
Yeah, so from these words you can understand that science fiction in a way was not born where we all think it was born, but it has some roots in some other countries as well. So that's just to say that every country in a way has some sort of science fiction, whether it is a fantastic or just a use of imagination. Of course, the proper name of science fiction comes in the beginning of the 19th century. Still, we don't have really a science fiction in those times. We have a proto-science fiction. That means that the people and some authors start to explore some ideas, especially the adventure in time and space, by a very famous writer that is Emilio Salgari. And although he never really moved from Italy, he was able to talk and write about Far East countries like Malaysia and Indonesia and India, sort of Rudyard Kipling in a way. The real break in this genre appeared with the development of futurism. Futurism is a very comprehensive, let's say, philosophy or movement in a way that embraced the big transformation of Italian society at the beginning of the 19th century. They believed that speed, strength, power, these elements were important for the development of society. So in this, from this point of view, they developed a whole philosophy, a whole movement, comprehensive of aesthetics, comprehensive of architecture, comprehensive of design, comprehensive of urbanism, a lot of things. And in that there was also science fiction, because the man should emancipate himself from his natural condition. And he had to have the power to set himself free from the chains of biology, from the chains of nature. In this sense, the book is that is most representative, even though it's not, literally speaking, a very nice book. It's by Filippo Tommaso Marinetti, the thinker of futurism, and he imagines these guys, Mafarka, is kind of the futurist, the ideal futurist, and it is set in imaginary Africa. And he describes the adventure of this Mafarka. He's, of course, is a conqueror, is a winner, and but instead of making himself the king of Africa, he decides to retreat and dedicate himself to the creation of a song. It is called the Gazuma, and it's a sort of robot with wings, very, very strange in a way, very bizarre. Let's say that the real, what we call properly science fiction, happened after the Second World War. In particular, in 1952, the magazine Urania was founded by Mondadori, and this is probably the longest magazine, of course in Italy, but probably also in Europe. It's a very important magazine because it translated things from English, of course, from other countries as well, not much, but still they did it. And it's the most successful magazine at the moment, together with another important magazine that was founded in 1976 by Vittorio Curtoni, that is called Robot, and that Mr. Zikovic have the first 30 numbers, so very precious treasure, and it's still considered an important magazine. I would like to just mention a couple of authors, very important. You probably heard about Primo Levi. He's very famous for another book, which is his experience during World War II, Se questo è un uomo. But he was also a biologist and a mathematician, and he had two collections of beautiful, excellent science fiction stories, really top class. Probably he, because it was not translated, these stories, at least in English, he anticipated many of the things that Philip K. Dick and Heinlein also wrote about, and Robert Sheckley also wrote about. So just mention two books: Storie Naturali, Natural Histories, 1966, and Vizio di Forma, Defect of Form, of 1971. I will not go into the details, but of course I have to mention Italo Calvino, which you probably know about. And he's not considered really science fiction, but more speculative fiction. And he was nominated for the Nebula Award in 1975 with the novel Le città invisibili, The Invisible Cities. His other book, Le Cosmicomiche, The Cosmicomics, from 1963, is a collection of stories dealing with scientific notions, astronomical notions, but they are aimed to build a surreal and bizarre plot. Another important author is, you probably know him through another name, is Ennio Flaiano, and he's a satirical writer and also a screenwriter for the Italian filmmaker Federico Fellini. And he wrote the screenplay of La Dolce Vita, which you probably have seen or heard about. The book I would like to mention from Ennio Flaiano is Un Marziano a Roma, A Martian in Rome, which talks about the arrival of an alien in Villa Borghese, the center of Rome. But the thing is that the starship is being fenced off. They close it, and the people, of course, have to pay to see it. You know, there's a ticket to pay. And the money will be used for some not very specified charity program. The Pope and the Italian President meet the Martian, and so he starts to spend a lot of time at banquets and cocktail parties and dancing and chatting and talking with people. So the alien is turned into a typical dolce vita character, and when he goes back to his starship to go away, he finds out that the starship has been taken away by local properties, so he cannot go back. To move on to the next 10 years, what we call the Italian New Wave. This is an important period because there has been a new wave everywhere in the world, of course, in the US and the UK, the British New Wave. And we also felt the crisis of capitalism, the crisis of the idea of never stopping progress, the idea of the more you have, the better you feel. That is due, of course, to the Cultural Revolution, to the war in Vietnam, to all the scandals and the idea of a better, more freedom, feminism. All these movements have had a huge impact on this period of time. And so the most important books in Italian science fiction is Quando le radici by Nino Aldani. This is a strange book because he kind of criticizes the future. He thinks that the future will not bring any progress, despite what the so-called propaganda or the so-called capitalistic way of life was trying to promote. Think that we were just coming from a very big crisis, and the 80s, on the contrary, was the years of consumism, of materialism. So he's a critic voice in this, and he thinks that we should go back to the country. We should go back to that period of time. And so in this book, he's really going to live outside of the city until some huge machines come and take away all the land. So it's not really a happy ending. During this period, there is also this problem that we had, very sad, that many Italian writers used to change their name, not to sound too Italian. Some people said that a UFO, an unidentified flying object, could never land in Lucca, in Italy. We've been influenced by the American way of science fiction, so that we felt a kind of
inferiority complex.
Yes, an inferiority complex, so that we changed our name. Especially also women had to do the double, change their name first into a man and then into...
Yes.
Sorry? Americanization, yes, of course.
It was mostly the readers who didn't want to read the Italian writers. And we had a silly situation when Urania was publishing a French writer whose surname was Rousseau, and when you, of course, it's a surname of Italian origin. So people saw the cover and say, "Oh, that's an Italian writer. I'm not interested in that." And he didn't sell, despite being a very good writer and not Italian anyway. Even I thought being Italian or not was not the real point. But for decades, Italian readers did not buy things written by Italian writers.
And so, the movement that I would like to remember in this period is a very interesting group of people coming, especially from Genoa, but they were spread in other cities as well. And they were called Un'ambigua utopia, which recalls the famous book by Ursula Le Guin, that is Possessed, An Ambiguous Utopia. The group used to call themselves also the Marxians. They were very left-wing, and they proposed a political approach to science fiction. Also, what I think is correct, in the sense that science fiction is a political genre for me, and it works well when it deals with political issues. So their kind of inspiration was, of course, important authors of the Brit and US New Wave, like J.G. Ballard, Brian Aldiss, Robert Silverberg, and the Russian structuralism. And I would like to mention, of course, one of the biggest name in the critic of this period, which is Darko Zubin, that contributed to the critic of science fiction with this wonderful book, The Metamorphosis of Science Fiction, which is a milestone for me. So, moving to the next one. This is the period of a crisis, a big one. Big crisis because science fiction doesn't get the recognition or the importance that the new wave had in the US and the UK. Robert Silverberg and J.G. Ballard are considered, mainstream almost. But in Italy this never happened. So in a way it looks like the Italian authors are feeling disillusioned. They didn't have their hopes fulfilled. And so in a way they turned from science fiction to something that is beside science fiction, for example, like alternative history. And we have an important, very good writer, Valerio Evangelisti, that explored the relationship between science fiction and religion in a series of books called Aymeric, the Inquisitor. And he goes back in time, in the Middle Age, and this kind of detective stories, right?
Yes.
Set in that time.
And I think Valerio is the only Italian writer and UK later that managed to live as a writer. I mean, his only job was as a writer.
Yeah.
Also because he has been published in France and in other countries.
Also because he's been published by mainstream publishers.
Yes.
That helps.
Yes.
Yeah. I'll try to wrap it up. I would like just to mention one guy which I really like, and he passed away 2 years ago, Massimo Mongai, and he wrote a very special kind of science fiction. We call him our Douglas Adams.
Yes.
Because he had these books that are set on an intergalactic environment, but the main character is a cook, is a chef. His most important book is Memorie di un cuoco d'astronave, Memories of a Spaceship Chef. And so he gives a lot of importance to food, and food as a way of keeping good relationship between planets. So in a way, he's part of us, like keeping good relationship through food is also what we just do these days over and over again. So the bond is very strict. And I would also have to say that he talks about tolerance, the principle of tolerance and the equality of all the races in the cosmos, while the galactic community, called Agoram, is liberal, free, also in sexual manners. So, it's also food and sex is two important drives of human life. And so I'll leave it to Flora.
Well, Massimo Monga was quite a character. It was really, really funny, especially having dinner with him. Yes, it was really, really funny. Anyway, then let's say that we are in 2000 now. So from 2000 to 2010, there are two main arguments, let's say subjects in Italian science fiction, post-cyberpunk and time travel. And there are an author that I like very much, she's my favorite author together with Franćesko, and a group of very young authors that they just met on the internet, and they decided, this group of young writers, to create a literary vanguard called connettivismo, that we could translate into English nexialism. Giovanni De Matteo, Luca Baroncini, Luca Gremo is his name, and Sandro Battisti. The main idea of this group of connettivisti is that they have a multidisciplinary approach to science fiction, and it is very important to, this multidisciplinary approach is very important and is the key to understand the complexity of postmodern time. And so the name connettivismo, so to connect, comes from the fact that they want to connect different disciplines, so not only literature, but also physics, astronomy, architecture. Usually when they do readings, they also have acting, so the theater is involved too, so it's a very complex thing, but very interesting. And let's say that the main author of this movement is Giovanni De Matteo, who also won once the Premio Urania Award. As Francesko was saying, Urania is the most important, let's say, you can maybe call it anthology too, is a collection of books that is dedicated to science fiction in Italy, and it has reached, I think, the 60 years now, so it is really important. All the most important Italian writers have written for and have been published by Urania Mondadori. And Giovanni De Matteo won, with his Sezione P Quadro, won the Urania Award, and he also wrote the Manifesto of Connettivism. In his book, Giovanni De Matteo creates a special police force. The police officers are known as necromancer, and they are equipped with a cybernetic implant. And this implant allows them to conduct their investigation, starting from the recovery of the victim's memories. The story is set in Naples, and this is very interesting because not so very often Italian writers set their stories in Italy, because as Francesko was saying, we Italians thought that a UFO would never land in Italy. And Naples is rebuilt after the eruption of the Vesuvius, the volcano, and the catastrophic consequences of the Third World War that occurred in the meantime. And the metropolis is flooded by refugees, has reached 6 million inhabitants, and is besieged by an ecological threat of uncertain origins. An anthropic mass able to regenerate itself by assimilating waste and invading areas abandoned by human activity. Then the other author that I would like to mention is Lanfranco Fabriani. He won twice the Urania Award with two novels that are set in the same, let's say, context, but in different era. He talks about time travel, and I think that he did something which is very peculiar, because it's not easy to write about time travel and say something new, but he managed to do it because he invented this how did you translate in Italian? Italian time chronograph. But the idea is that every country has a secret service and a counter-secret service that is a temporal secret service. So they use these time machines that were probably invented by Leonardo. Even the Vatican State has it, and so they go back and forth in time trying to change, of course, the course of history. And it is also very funny because Lanfranco also wrote many short stories about that, and he even managed to write one about the supposed death of Paul McCartney of the Beatles. So basically, in that short story, the main character Mariani and Marina Savoldi, which is the second main character, and it's a woman, which is not very often. You can see that very often in Italian science fiction. They go back in time to save Paul McCartney from the car accident, and so because the Beatles were too important to stop there. And what I think is also interesting is that in Spain there is a TV series that is very popular at the moment that is called El Ministerio del Tiempo, which is the Ministry of Time Travel, and I can assure you that the idea is exactly the one that Lanfranco wrote. I'm sure that it's just a coincidence, but the series is very well done, by the way. But the ideas are exactly the same, and I think it's a very nice idea.
Well, if they had Lanfranco to write the scripts, I think it would be a much better series anyway. It's one of my favorite series, but they have huge holes in the plots of the episodes. Lanfranco writes much better.
Okay, so back to the last part, that is science fiction from the year 2000 to the present time. There are three trends that I would like to highlight. The first one is literary science fiction. Many authors are now starting to understand the importance of technology and how innovation is getting more and more relevant and present into our life. So it's almost impossible to escape these themes like artificial intelligence, climate change, biotechnology, the use of social networks or algorithm, or all these things are not science fiction anymore. So in a way, the present is getting more futuristic, more science fictional, and many literary authors are understanding this and using the themes of science fiction in their books. One of them is Tullio Amoledo, very relevant Italian writer, and in this book, L'anno dei 12 inverni, the 12th winter year, he deals with time travel also, love and redemption, in a mix of science fiction and very realistic narrative. Then I would like to mention also Vittorio Catani.
Yes.
Is also a master of science fiction in Italy, with his book The Fifth Principle, Il Quinto Principio, and he goes into mainstream. That's another way. So literary science fiction, literary authors are using science fiction, and on the other side, science fiction is getting into the mainstream. So in this book, in the year 2043, the Earth is devastated by some exceptional events. These are catastrophes that violate the laws of physics, and the plot is very complex. But in a way, there are things like decrease or absence of gravity in certain territories. There is the appearance of objects that create absolute void. Many scenarios are in the book. There is a hidden auction for the privatization of Antarctica to face the global water crisis. There is hyper-capitalism based on an economy of debt nearing collapse. There is an enlargement, of course, of the rich-poor gap. So it's really the case that science fiction cannot be ignored anymore. The last topic is a little bit personal. Of course, I'm part of this, so I'm willing to play this game. And it's the fact that Italian science fiction is getting a bit more into the English market. I've been pushing this over and over and over, and finally an Italian book was published by a US publisher last year, before it was published in Australia, and it's this book, Next Human, that was originally published in Italian as Livido, and it talks about post-humanism. It's a very strange love story where a guy finds a head in a huge dump, in a huge landfill, and he develops a kind of obsession for this head, and it will take you 20 years, more than 20 years to discover what really happened. And there is the principle of mind uploading, something that you probably, if you see Black Mirror, the TV series, you may have heard about it, is uploading your personality on an artificial body, and then an artificial me, and then download it into an artificial body. So there's a lot of talk about philosophy, is if our soul, something that is in the body or not, it can be recorded and transported. And last, I would like, and not least, of course, I would like to mention Claudia Faris. She's probably the best female, and I wouldn't even like to make this separation, but I like to say that she's been translated in English, and she will be published in the US next year with the first collection of short stories called Creative Surgery. And I'm very proud because I published this anthology last year, and it's really the case that finally some new voice come out also on the US market. It's a small press, but still we're trying to fight that 3% that is a very big wall to escalate.
Yes, also because Claudia is very shy, so you were... Claudia, yes, we had her as a guest at our convention, thanks to Francesko, because she comes from Sardinia, and she's really just want to write. She doesn't care a lot about promotion. She's very shy, but she's a very intelligent woman. So I completely agree with Francesko. At least for me, she's the best female writer, and as you didn't want to make this difference, because I think too it's not the case. She's one of the best writers we have in Italy, of course. And of course, this was a very short summarize, let's say, of the summaries of the Italian writers, because there are so many more that were great. Vittorio Vittoni too was a great writer, and other mainstream authors like Dino Buzzati, which is very famous for other mainstream novels, then decided to write short science fiction short stories. And so there is quite a lot going on.
May I just add a few words in connection with this to add something to the history of the Italian science fiction? I think we shouldn't omit a very important aspect of Italian science fiction, and that is the fact that for many years in Trieste there was a huge queue of main European science fiction film festival.
There still is in Trieste.
Yes, it was founded in 1972.
I'm old enough to have a chance to be there from the very beginning and to take part in it once I was a member of the jury. And this was just a jam. It was brilliant. It was led by a group of enthusiasts.
Yes.
First of all, Bruno Orlando,
Yes.
who was the heart and the brain of the festival, and if it is still alive and well, you are simply not aware of everything.
Yes, and plus, also, I don't know how many of you know that, but Eurocon, the first Eurocon, was held in Trieste.
And may I say that Arthur Clarke was there for the first Eurocon. I was there. I found all the night from Perugia to Trieste just in order to participate.
Yes, because Gianfranco Visiani and Ernesto Reggetti, that unfortunately are not with us anymore, had this idea of creating, let's say, a space for where European science fiction could connect. So yes, I think it's
important.
So, we have been talking about this festival and Eurocon, which leads us to the next part of this panel about fandom. Where would we be if there were science fiction writers but no one was reading them? Well, fortunately there are people who read them, and some of them become fans, and fans are attracted to each other. So there's a movement which is called fandom. In the United States it was born in the late 30s. They started having conventions very early. In Italy it happened a bit later. I think the first things I've seen mentioned of organized fandom in Italy were from the 60s. There were some local groups of fans, so fans would be just with people from their immediate neighborhood. They had just one effective way of communication. It was the fanzine. I don't know if you've heard of that. They would take a typewriter and then a mimeograph, which was a tool for making a reproduction of a printed page, or a typed page. And this is Sevagram, one of the oldest, not the oldest one, but one of the oldest. And it was founded by Riccardo Valla, who was mentioned earlier as one of the best translators we ever had in Italy. Not only he was a translator, he also published his magazine, so people sent him articles, short stories. He wrote his own ones. They wrote letters to him, and he would type them on a special paper, add drawings, make sometimes do the titles by pencil, and on a mimeograph he would make a few dozens of copies, maybe a few hundreds of copies of this, and he would mail them to other interested people. Most of these people would have their own fanzines, and they would send him their own. So, of course, it's in Italian, so few of you will be able to read it, but what I wanted to show was the look of a fanzine, because it's something we are not used to anymore. And you would have small ads from other clubs, sometimes even abroad. That was an ad from the British Science Fiction Association, which wanted to be known in Italy too. So, after the fanzine, what came? The conventions. The first Italian convention was in Trieste. We have been talking about it. It was in 1972, and it was the first Italcon. Italcon was, and still is, the national convention for Italian fans. It's where we give a prize which is called Premio Italia, and it's been held almost every year since 1972. It was also the first Eurocon, so I'm not going into that. Again, there have been 4 Eurocons in Italy since. It is a roving convention, so it goes around. It started in Trieste, it moved to other places. The most popular places for Italcon have been Courmayeur, San Marino, and Fiuggi. There are many more conventions, and when they are successful, sometimes they get to be Italcon for a year. The Italian way of conventions. English, American conventions usually are Congress Hall. You go listen to a writer. Sometimes you meet them in a bar outside, but in Italy, at lunchtime and at dinner time, everything stops. The convention center closes, everyone goes to the dinner.
Exactly.
I thought this was quite special, then I came to Montenegro. And I said that your lunch breaks and dinner breaks are longer than ours. So I wrote these slides before coming here. I will have to update them somehow. So there's not too much I have to say about that. The events, there are also smaller gatherings of fans. For example, in Milan they had a peculiar one which was called Cenacolo Milanese. The Cenacolo is the painting by Leonardo da Vinci of the Last Supper. And so they were meeting for dinner. I don't need to say that. And they used to have that every month for a time. Now it's more rare, but it was interesting. There are some other groups which gather around one writer. For example, Vittorio Burtoni, which we mentioned earlier, had his friends meet with him every year. He even has a special award, but it was not a real award, it was a spoof award. It was for the worst short story. He would give out a subject a few months in advance, and everyone had to do their best to make the worst possible story about the subject. Okay. Valerio Evangelista. Okay.
No, sorry, just one thing. When Gino said that we had 4 Eurocon, in reality we had 3, because one was in San Marino, and San Marino is a state, is a club in Italy, like the Vatican State, so it's their Eurocon.
Oh, the Eurocon in the Vatican.
Yeah, no.
We may get there. But yeah, it's funny that a big number of Italians were not in Italy, and a good number of them were in Courmayeur, which is an Italian town with a foreign name. So it's quite curious. But well, maybe we science fiction fans are more open to outside ideas than other people.
Okay.
Okay. About gatherings, I was going to mention Valerio Evangelisti. That's the last sentence.
Okay.
He was a close friend of Vittorio Burtoni, and he still has yearly meetings with friends and other fans. And that's about Italian fandom, just a small glimpse.
If there is any question, or we finish. Okay, thank you very much for being here. Thanks to the professor.